Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Established Run's NBA Injury Report Analysis Show, a play-in edition. Just 2 games on the slate tonight. Will be a quick conversation, but joining me as I'll always do it is Mike Gallagher. Mike, how are you doing on #OurWolves play-in day?
Doing great. Yeah, excited for meaningful basketball. You probably are more excited than I am because I do like
Much more
the
excited.
games. Yeah, so feeling pretty good. Yeah, I did really good game late. I think this is the best playing game, the Wolves Clippers. And man, we've been talking a lot because both these coaches are such strategists and like against each other. There's so many different layers to this on whose minutes could get cut, who can get boosted. It's crazy. So it takes Ty Lue in a playoff series, man. We'll talk a little bit about it, but yeah, we're getting a nice little warm up here for the playoffs, trying to figure out these minutes.
Yeah, and obviously during the course of the regular season, like we'll talk about all the different matchup adjustments and different things like that on the DFS show tonight. So we'll try not to spill everything that we intend to put behind the paywall. Mike and I are both very talkative and willing to share, but we'll keep stuff behind the paywall in terms of like rotation expectations and different things like that. We'll stick to just injuries for this one. But generally, one thing that I'll just note in the playoffs is expect tighter rotations. So you're always trying to figure out at the beginning of the playoffs who are the players that are most vulnerable and likely to be cut from the playoff rotation. A lot of teams will play 10 in the regular season and cut to 8 or 9 in the playoffs. As you get deeper in the series, that could cut to 7 or 6, depending on the series and how desperate teams are. So just be prepared. Things are a little bit different come playoff time. Some of these teams are new to the playoffs, and we haven't seen how their coaches have reacted in the past with situations. But I would expect tonight's games to be somewhat closer to how these teams have managed themselves at the end of the regular season, because it's not do or die. Tomorrow night's games, I think you could see some really tight rotations potentially in spots, although both those games have teams that are a little bit deeper on the whole, so maybe not, but we'll see. But generally, the more desperate teams are, the more they play their best players, typically. So with all that said, let's just talk injuries. The only questionable tag we had on the injury report, we actually got clarity before we came on the show today, and that's Luke Kennard, who was questionable for the Clippers. He's been ruled out now. In terms of the Clippers, let's just talk through what do we think this means for Luke Kennard's absence. I think generally it means we're going to see an 8-man rotation tonight is my guess. What are your thoughts on the size of the Clippers rotation in the absence of Luke Kennard?
Honestly, I didn't think he was locked to play anyways.
Yeah.
Because I think you wanted to play, obviously, Batum a good bit. You want to play Morris. You want to play Norm. You want to play Rocco. You got Hartenstein. They don't need him. He was like clearly the 9th man in this rotation. So I don't think it makes a big change. We probably we had him in 10 minutes before the injury.
Yeah, we had him like 8, I think, is where we were at before we pulled him out.
Yeah, so it's going to add a little bit more value to Norm Powell specifically, right? Because you're taking out Kennard's spacing against a team that is one of the worst teams at defending the 3-ball. So I think this makes Norm a little bit more important. May not get more minutes, but I could see him shooting more. Rocco as well. I think they'll generally just play a little bit bigger. I don't think this really affects Terrence Mann. We'll see if Terrence Mann gets hot. I think Reggie Jackson's a little bit on thin ice in the playoffs because they don't need his offense anymore with Paul George. We'll talk more about that later. But, Paul George is going to play a bunch. We saw him play 19.5 first half minutes in this game. I pulled on the screen here, tore it up. We had an over on him. I hit every over we could hit, and it was print. I expect Paul George to play a ton. We'll talk more about the matchup as we'll see some big defenders. But, not a huge fallout from this Kennard injury.
Yeah, and then I think the big question mark for them is, who is most vulnerable in terms of seeing minutes cut if the Clippers were to really tighten things up tonight. And, when we talk about like most vulnerable, you often talk about like who has the furthest to fall from where they were. I think Paul George is obviously ridiculously safe. I think Norm Powell, the question mark is how many minutes can he play? He had basically gotten up to like low to mid 20s. Can he get into the high 20s, into the low 30s? That's a question mark. My assumption is that he will continue to come off the bench. And it's hard to get into the low 30s off the bench. So, I think we're a little bit higher than norm on the rest of the industry right now. And that might actually be something we need to take a second look at and pull down a little bit more. But I think those 2 guys that are minutes, I think are fairly small range. The question is just how much Norm can play. but I think they're pretty stable and locked in. Who do you think is the third most safe Clipper? Because with Clippers, it seems like nobody's really safe, but who do you think is the third most safe in terms of their minutes not being at risk?
I think Batum's actually pretty safe. We've seen they really lean on him in the playoffs. We saw him play like 40 in the Jazz series.
Yep.
They've used him before against Karl-Anthony Towns. So I feel pretty good about his minutes relative to where they usually are. I think, and then, I don't feel great about Zoo, and like I talked about this on 3-ball too. Like Zoo relation, like obviously you think center, you think Cat. Zoo's not going to guard Cat. It's going to be Batum.
You guard Vanderbilt.
Rocco. Yep, it's going to be guarding Vanderbilt. So Chris Finch, who says he wants to keep defenses honest and cutting Vando's minutes. We saw Vando get down to teens sometimes. So I don't feel like. And the fact that I said Batum is really just an indictment on like the whole team. How I don't feel great about anybody here. Ty Lue, all bets are off. I think he's going to start with this group, and then he's going to go a number of ways here, depending on how it's working. Are they going to run the high ball cover? I'm sorry, getting ahead of myself. Are they going to run that high ball Luka defense? Are they going to play more droppy? They play a lot of high stuff. So it's going to be crazy. Like this is like such a hard thing to predict, which is what you and I are really good at doing. But with Ty Lue, it's a very tricky situation.
Yeah. Across the way from this in this game with Minnesota, no big injuries kind of on the injury report for Minnesota. So, they look good to go, but we know that Anthony Edwards and D'Angelo Russell have been dealing with kind of nagging things throughout the course of the second half of the season. Do you have any additional notes on Minnesota you want to share with the good folks?
Yeah, Chris Finch had said that D'Lo's good to go. We saw Patrick Beverley get managed as well. I took that as all just management. We saw the Wolves having a ton of Q tags the last month and a half or so. So I think they should be good to go. Worth noting, man, Anthony Edwards, he's really fallen off, but his minutes are down. Since Thursday, he's played just these 18 minutes. So they were able to kind of keep him in check. So I think Ant could play, pretty good bit here in a matchup I actually kind of like for him.
Yeah, they went in that final game. They had nothing to play for, so they went the route of just playing guys basically a little bit, and then Patrick Beverley took it a little bit further and got ejected to take it to the next level. So we will see in terms of their playoff rotation. The guys that could be on the fringe of the playoff rotation, looking through Taurean Prince, Jalen Noel, Jordan McLaughlin. Which one of those guys do you think is kind of most vulnerable to potentially losing playing time in this particular matchup?
I would say for sure Noel. I think that unless the Clippers are like running a lot of like aggressive defenses where they can't get their offense going, like he'd have to be like I don't think he's gonna be in the initial rotation, but if like things are going badly and they need like a spark to kind of get offense on his own, like I think that's where they would go. Him and I guess McLaughlin, I would lump him in there too. I think there's going to be a lot of size, not really at the 5, but 3 through 4. So it's going to kind of trickle down. I think those smaller guards could be affected. I think Prince is safe. I think the McDaniels Vanderbilt thing is so fascinating here because I think it makes a lot of sense to play McDaniels more than Vanderbilt for spacing. He's, Vanderbilt's better against like the 3-4s, and McDaniels is more effective against the 2-3s like Paul George to me. So it's like the bottom line here is like Vanderbilt's minutes could be really, really dicey here.
Well, the question is, could they play both of them together? Right? Because you have enough offense with Anthony Edwards, D'Angelo Russell, and Karl-Anthony Towns, and they've done that at times in the past. They, early in the season, we had talked about kind of Minnesota with the defenders and the offensive players in terms of how they like wanted to make sure they had at least one defender on the floor at all times, sometimes two. And it started the season where McDaniels and Vanderbilt would play a little bit more together. It'll be interesting against a Clippers team that plays kind of bigger, 2 through 4, really, if that size is necessary and ends up clipping like Malik Beasley as somebody who, could potentially lose playing time. Now, Beasley played really well down the stretch. So I think or Bev, like you talked about, if Reggie Jackson, if his minutes were vulnerable. Well, if Reggie Jackson's not out there and they're playing basically like Paul George as the point guard, Patrick Beverley's useless. You know what I mean? So it'll be really interesting to push and pull on this matchup. You talked about Vanderbilt and Zubac's minutes being kind of push and pull together or correlating together, moving in the same direction. Beverley and Reggie Jackson's minutes could move in kind of the same direction as well.
Yep. And I'll add, there was a quote from Finch saying how he was actually asked about Nathan Knight. And I thought it was interesting. He talked about using McDaniels as a 4. Like that kind of lets you feel like kind of like get you into his head thinking about how they want to really utilize McDaniels, I think. But again, the matchup could dictate that they go bigger. But,
Yeah.
I thought that was an interesting quote.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about the other game. We'll start with Brooklyn, where there was more injury information than on the Cleveland side. Brooklyn listed Goran Dragic as available, but he was quoted as saying he's not sure how many minutes he'll play. Was dealing with COVID and was not feeling very well. Seth Curry has been upgraded to probable. He missed the last game of the season against the Pacers. We did see these two teams play the second to last game of the season, but the Nets were without Goran Dragic in that game. So it's slightly different for the Nets, but we did see kind of the elevated minutes for Kevin Durant. Bruce Brown was exceptional in that game. I mean, 18, 10, and 8 with a steal and 4 blocks is outrageous in 40 minutes. And without Goran Dragic, they chose to solve those extra minutes basically by playing Patty Mills more and Kessler Edwards more as well. With Dragic back in the fold, how much we don't know. I don't expect that Dragic will start, given this concern over the minutes limit and whatnot. I assume it'll be Kyrie, Seth, Drummond, Brown, and KD once again. And then I think Dragic's minutes, whatever he gets, mostly come from Mills and Edwards. But how much, is anybody's guess in this? Is that your expectation as well?
Yeah, I mean, he's locked in a room in Atlanta. He's not young anymore, so it may be tough for him to ramp up. They don't need him in this matchup, in my opinion, as much. Bruce Brown is. We saw Bruce, about 2 weeks ago, lose minutes, and we bet a couple unders on him because Dragic was clearly cutting him down.
Yeah.
But in this matchup, they need Bruce Brown to guard Darius Garland here. So I think Bruce is still pretty safe. Seth will probably be hanging around 30 again. Worth noting, he was probable, got downgraded to questionable, didn't play. We had an under on him. But, I would expect, as you said, Kessler and Patty to take a bit of a hit. I will add, though, there's a small chance that if he is in a good shape, they could cut Drummond down. Now, that means you're going to be playing KD at the 5 against Mobley. Do you want to do that? Maybe not. So, there's a lot of ways that Nash could play it if they want to get aggressive with the rotation.
Yeah, and between the two centers, obviously we've seen, Drummond and Claxton during the course of the season kind of, tug and pull at each other's minutes. This feels like a little bit more of a Drummond spot to me than a Claxton spot, but wanted your take on that as well.
Yeah, I think it does. I think so too. You don't really need too much of like the switchy perimeter defense if you're going to use Bruce Brown a bunch of minutes. So I'm with you there. But yeah, they did. I think they closed with Patty Mills over Drummond, if I remember, in the last game.
Yep.
They ran a little bit of Drummond, but like the very, very end. But yeah, definitely.
It seems to me like Cleveland's rebounding is something that you want to try to nullify the best you can. And Drummond's just a big body that, takes up a lot of size there.
Yeah.
On the Cleveland side of things, they will not be with Jared Allen. He is still out for this play-in game. Dean Wade is also out along with Colin Sexton. They've been out for a little while now. In terms of projecting Cleveland, like they have basically the same guys we saw last game. Lauri Markkanen got into foul trouble in that game. Karis LeVert got into a little bit of foul trouble as well. But basically the same guys. Mobley was kind of early on and coming back, so he got to 34. I think he'll probably get to upper 30s here. The interesting thing for me is Kevin Love and Lauri Markkanen and Jetty Osman and Lamar Stevens, how those 4 players interact. Because obviously the challenge that the Nets present is Kevin Durant on the perimeter. And we saw earlier in the season, Dean Wade actually did a pretty decent job against Kevin Durant. Lowry got into foul trouble last game against Kevin Durant, but I think that's, their best option is Lowry. And then the after that, I think, you probably don't want Kevin Love in those minutes. You want him staggered away from KD as much as possible. And then Jetty picked up a bunch of minutes from Lowry getting into foul trouble last game and usurped Lamar Stevens. What are your thought processes on those 4 players and whose minutes are most secure of those 4?
Yeah, I think Lowry's are pretty safe, but there's some risk. They, as you mentioned, he got into foul trouble the last time. They put Karis LeVert on him sometimes to kind of ease the burden on the fouls later in the game. They do have Lamar Stevens, who I think is a pretty good matchup there. So I think Love's range is like pretty safe. I think I feel pretty confident he's gonna be in the 20 to 24 spot. Laurie, should be safe. You would think most times he's pretty safe, but yeah, it should be pretty similar. But Laurie's probably the safest though.
All right, I think that's gonna do it. No other injury information to really talk through.
I'll add him just with Mobley really quick.
Yep.
He was supposed to be limited in this game. This is the game he came back. This
Right.
is the game that they said they want to put too many minutes on him. Plays 34 minutes. Like
Yeah.
that's a pretty big indication that my man could play a big
Yeah.
amount of minutes here in the spot.
Yeah. All right. We will be back behind the paywall, an established run, with another episode of Established Show with myself and Mike Gallagher tonight at 5 o'clock Eastern time. In that show, we will break down all the different rotation expectations that we have for these two matchups and all the different ways things can go. We'll talk about different correlations you can create based on some of those push and pull scenarios, both in terms of DFS, which is what the show is really geared towards, but also some of that information can be used in terms of thinking through single game parlays and different things like that. We'll be there to talk about it 5 o'clock Eastern behind the paywall. If you do not subscribe to our paywall product, please subscribe to the YouTube channel here. Continue to support us, giving you the free content that we will. We will be going throughout the playoffs until we get down to like 1 game per day. On the 1 games, we're not going to pop in. On the 2 games, as long as there's injury information to talk about, we'll pop in. But if there's not, we could cancel shows too if like there's totally clean injury reports. So just be aware there. Right now, we're scheduled for on every day this week with the exception of Thursday. And if you are a paywall subscriber, Mike and I are going to do special shows on Saturday and Sunday morning to cover these 2 4-game slates. I know it looks like a 3-game slate and a 5-game slate there. ESPN has it scheduled really weird on their drop down. But we will cover those 2 4-game slates to make sure that everybody is prepared from a DFS perspective, how these teams match up with one another.
And I'm writing matchups over the weekend too for the matchup gang.
Always a crowd pleaser, Mike Gallagher. So with that said, best of luck in the games tonight, in your bets. Enjoy the contest. We'll be enjoying the play-in as well. And we'll see you tomorrow at 2 o'clock Eastern for another edition of Established Runs NBA and Drew.